So thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. My name is Marquise King Mason. Oh, I need to rename myself, looks like, but I'm the Climate Justice Community Organizer with CHB. We're presenting to you as the Tacoma Green New Deal Coalition today, which we're really excited to share more about our work. And so, I'm sure a lot of you who are on this already know about the Tacoma Green New Deal. It's one of our newer campaigns. And so we really feel like there's a lot of different areas and avenues that, transformational climate justice work can take and we can pursue. And so this is one of our newer ones. For those who don't know, CHB, we've been working since the 1990s since 1990, I should say, to make sure that commencement bay is cleaned up, and our work is extended into fossil fuel and fossil fuel infrastructure work. And so we recognize that to be good environmentalists and to be good keepers of the bay and to preserve these waters, we have to do a lot of different work in different areas. So before we get into all that, though, I want to say thank you to our funders and supporters. So we're funded in part by the State Department of Ecology, Tacoma Creates, alongside some organizations like Harder, Bullet, and Horizons Foundations. But the work and opinions and perspectives in this are uniquely Community for Healthy Bays and then our Tacoma Green New Deal coalitions. Just because we're being funded by Tacoma Creates or the Department of Ecology doesn't mean that they necessarily share all of these perspectives. The same thing goes for our City of City of Tacoma staff friends who are here today. They're here just to educate on city processes. Their presence here doesn't necessarily mean an endorsement of any policy or any of our advocacy or any of our campaigns, but just that they want to be here as partners to make sure that we get some really good information out to community. All righty. And so this is the Tacoma Green New Deal Coalition. So so far in the coalition, I think you can see it on screen. Our coalition is made up of 350 Tacoma, who's going to be talking today, Communities for Healthy Bay, Sunrise Tacoma, who drafted our Tacoma Green New Deal, Tacoma DSA, and then the Conversation 253. And I think we left some folks off here like Indivisible Tacoma as well. So right now, the Tacoma Green New Deals are a chance to transform Tacoma at the scale needed to do our part to avert climate ruin and make a down payment on programs and infrastructure that will serve Tacoma for generations. So, Tacoma, the Green New Deal has been out in the kind of ether for, gosh, how long has it been? I think 3 years now. And so CHB chose to step into this realm alongside the Tacoma Green New Deal Coalition because we know that, we don't just need transformational climate policy at the federal level or just a federal framework. We need local solutions to transform Tacoma from the grassroots up. And so we know Tacoma Green New Deal is the perfect kind of platform to meet that moment. We have to do a lot of different things, right? As environmentalists, we have to show that climate action can improve people's lives for the better. We have to show that climate advocates can be just and pursue justice in all of its forms. And we also have to show that there is a bright future ahead of us and that, climate change and climate action doesn't have to be purely sacrifices, right? There's gonna be a lot of hardship from climate calamity. But while we're trying to, avert climate ruin, we can make sure we transform our communities in a way that's positive, leaving behind disinvestment and austerity and food deserts and all those things that we know don't serve healthy, vibrant communities. And so I want to take folks through just kind of the policy pillars of the Tacoma Green New Deal. So we have three kind of policy pillars, and this is kind of how we frame it. So we have environmental justice for all, we have a just transition off fossil fuels, and we have good green jobs. So those three policy pillars are how we kind of contextualize the work that we're doing. There's policies that go beneath that to make sure that we're doing a lot of different things. So I'm going to take folks through the three pillars really quick before we jump into kind of the budget stuff and all the juicy stuff that we're here for. So pillar one, which is environmental justice for all, is making sure that we are kind of reducing some of those environmental justice, environmental racism burdens in our communities. So you'll see things in that pillar like making sure that we have 100% clean electricity by 2030, pursuing things like fair free transit, creating a climate justice task force at the City of Tacoma, increasing climate resiliency education, reducing toxic stormwater runoff to protect aquatic life, and then expanding food networks to make sure that we are addressing food deserts in Tacoma. The second pillar is a just transition on fossil fuels. And so that kind of means, if folks have heard of just transition, it just means how do we justly transition into the future, in a future that's free of fossil fuels or that's low carbon or that's just. So we know that we need to reach net zero carbon emissions before 2050, sometime around 2040, because as the United States is a developed economy, we have the ability, capacity, and infrastructure to do that quicker than some other economies. We've already heard that countries like China, And India and Russia are going to be actually aiming for net zero after 2050. And so we know that 2050 is kind of a very important line in our climate future. And so it's on communities like Tacoma and the United States to try to hit net zero before that 2050. We also want to make sure we get fossil natural gas out of buildings and homes. We know that gas is detrimental to human health and the climate health. So we want to make sure that we get those out of buildings. We want to pursue something called a Just Transition Fund, which is basically setting aside dollars to make sure that we are transitioning workers into a fossil-free future. We know that fossil fuel workers and folks who work in polluting industries are not our enemies. We want to make sure that they're taken care of in this transition forward. Another one is we want to establish, solar gardens in Tacoma to make sure that we're diversifying our power sources. We're very blessed to have low carbon energy from, dams and rivers and whatnot. And while that's good for now, we know that they're not always equitable. So making sure we're diversifying our energy portfolio is really important to be adjust Tacoma. And then lastly, we want to make sure we protect Tacoma tide flats. And we'll talk more about that later, but we want to make sure that we're supporting things like a sub-area plan that has good investments in the tide flats area, and making sure that we limit fossil fuel expansions and start to make sure we transition to clean industries in the tide flats. And then the last policy bucket, I know there's a lot of policies coming out of here. I'm sure folks have already been inoculated with this from some of our social media in our last event, but the last one is good green jobs. And we know jobs and economic justice and labor should be at the forefront of environmental policy if we want to build a really big coalition that can do a lot of difficult things in the face of, moneyed interests and fossil fuel companies and stuff like that. So if you take care of workers, then we're doing our part as environmentalists to pursue, justice in all of its forms. So one of those policies is we want to establish a Tacoma Green Jobs Corps, making sure that we're transitioning folks into the future with, good jobs, and making sure that we're bringing young people up as apprentices and whatnot into good jobs like retrofit homes, build buildings, etc., plant trees. Those are all good jobs that we can get folks into that are away from polluting industries. Another one is we want to, I already talked about creating jobs retrofitting buildings, creating jobs building more affordable housing, and then obviously we want to increase tree canopy to turn away from things like urban heat islands, where we know that urban areas, especially urban areas that don't have a lot of tree canopy, are a lot hotter than their surrounding areas, which is a huge justice and equity issue when we have a lot of folks of color in really urbanized areas. Alrighty, so these are some of our goals before we jump into some of the budget stuff, which I think is the funnest part. We hear from some diverse voices. So this is just here to contextualize the work we're doing for y'all. So we kind of think of there's three areas where we see the Tacoma Green New Deal as being able to come real. The first one is Home in Tacoma. So I'm sure folks know this, but we're in Home in Tacoma phase 2 right now. And so, in Home in Tacoma, once that policy framework is passed and the land use code is updated, we can ensure that we prioritize density. We can make sure we have transit-oriented development in Tacoma, and we can make sure everyone is available to afford to live in Tacoma, which is a huge equity piece, while we also promote green development. The second bucket of that is Tide Flat Sub-Area Plan. So the Tide Flat Sub-Area Plan is going to do massive things like making sure that Tacoma, the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, the city, the county, the port, Fife are all interconnected in ways that support green manufacturers, restore the ecosystems in and around Commencement Bay, and just invest in things like clean fuels and the industries of the future that we know Tacoma can be more reliant on than the corporate polluters that we have in our tide flats right now. And the last kind of bucket to all of this work is we know that even if we have the best home in Tacoma, and even if we have the strongest tide flat Sub-Area Plan, there's still going to be some policies that we are needed to make sure we're matching the moment when it comes to climate action. And so that's where we're going to be calling on the City of Tacoma to pass a Tacoma Green New Deal resolution. And then we want to get some of the Tacoma Green New Deal components funded in the budget for 2023 and 2024. And that's why y'all are here to learn about the budget. So I won't get too much into that part yet, but we know that it's essential to make sure that all these programs and services are funded in continuum. Alrighty, so I'm going to turn it over to Grace, and Grace is going to talk a little bit about why budgets are moral documents and why we can look to our neighbors up north in Seattle to look to really, really powerful inspiration. But just to kind of tee that up, we've seen cities like Seattle and Boston invest in the last year in millions and millions and millions of dollars into Green New Deals. And so we know that it's been done before, and we know that it's not just some radical policy framework, but it's actually a governance strategy, right? To make sure we're matching the moment when it comes to climate action. So Grace will jump into this more in a second, but our neighbors up north in Seattle were able to pass $60 million in Green New Deal funding in 2021, which is a huge number. And that's on top of this larger budget that they passed that Grace is going to talk about, that did some really other cool stuff around affordable housing. And so, we know it can be done, and we know that what we're asking for in Tacoma is reasonable and it's practical, and it gets us to the future. We can also look to the other coast. So going, gosh, how long is the U.S.? I don't know, 3,000 miles. I don't know if that's accurate, but going coast to coast. Our friends over in Boston, actually one of my best friends just moved a couple months ago, so maybe I'll ask him how that went. But they were able to invest $31.5 million in climate-focused investments as part of their Boston Green New Deal framework. And that was on top of new investments, like they allowed their entire main 4 bus lines to go fare-free, which is huge. That serves hundreds of thousands of residents in Boston. And then they're also to set aside on top of that another 31 million in new climate investments for the 2021 budget year. So we know that budget and climate go hand in hand, and that we can do some really progressive and bold things while taking care of the folks that we need to take care of. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grace, and Grace is going to take it away.
Cool. Thank you so much, Marquise. And also, I'm going to start a little timer for myself because I really I'm excited and I don't want to use up a bunch of time. How does 5 minutes sound, or does that sound about right?
Yeah, 5 to 7. I think you'll be good, even if you go
Cool.
over.
Cool. Okay. Um, hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be here tonight. My name is Grace Hope, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm a staff member at 350 Seattle, and my body of work is actually at the statewide legislative level for the most part. But I'm so excited to be here tonight talking about 350 Seattle's Green New Deal work, and also a little bit of the story of what's kind of been happening in that space. Um, and and anyway, so I'm a huge fan of this work, and so also super excited to talk about it. So just for a little bit of context, you know, for myself as an organizer in Tacoma and Seattle, and also working in city spaces, but observing a lot of community organizing, asking the question of how does change happen in the city? How do we make it happen? Is it through a policy? Is it through this or through that? And so I just want to walk through a little bit of learning, a little bit of story with 350 Seattle. Way back in 2018, before I came along, the organization tried to do cool, let's make change in the city. Let's ban natural gas in buildings. Let's get an ordinance. There's science behind it. We can get a bunch of public comment. Um, and I put gas ban law on here because it turns out that you can't just solve issues by passing sweeping ordinances without actually taking into account what does it mean for a just transition for workers, what kind of deep organizing does it take to get labor on board. So this was an early moment for 350 Seattle to be like, oh, this actually is not necessarily a great path forward, just trying to ban things or pass policies. We know that resolutions and ordinances are really important, but they're just a piece of how we make change happen in our cities. Um, and kind of speaking to the budgets as moral documents, I really appreciate that framework, Marquise. I think we're all really used to seeing cities say what they know we want to hear. I was at Seattle City Hall last night, and they have the huge Black Lives Matter mural on the road. Um, but where cities spend their money is actually a reflection of their values for their community and how they actually want to treat people and what they really believe when it comes to climate crisis and climate chaos, who deserves to be taken care of. And so the advocacy that we can do as organizers to push on our city to change the way investments are spent is one of the most impactful things that we can do, because sometimes we get a resolution or an ordinance in place and we see those sit there and not a whole lot actually happens in our communities. And so partnering with budget advocacy is really huge. So I'm going to fast forward just a little bit and talk about kind of the 2022 to where or 2020 to where we are right now. Some of the big lessons that we learned was oh, we need to do much deeper organizing with many more partners in order to actually have success. And instead of coming at natural gas, getting rid of gas through a ban, we actually were able to partner with folks to get some programs in place and some funding in place so that people could get transitioned off of fossil fuels in their homes. And realizing that we don't always need a flashy ordinance, sometimes we just need program solutions to take care of people. Solidarity Budget was born in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter uprising and the pandemic, and a great moment in the city, realizing that many, many organizations actually have the same common foe and the same common values. And it makes way more sense for us to work together in a big coalition to advocate for what our communities need in the budget. And so the solidarity budget, um, it really had this big grand vision representing the needs of many, many different communities who were part of that coalition or still part of that coalition. Um, so this vision included things like affordable housing, community accountable non-armed crisis responders, behavioral and mental health services, walkable neighborhoods, participatory budgeting, digital equity, community climate resilience, a whole bunch of other factors as well. Um, the Solidarity Budget Coalition has been a pretty amazing coalition of groups, but they've also been working together now for several years. And this means that this coalition space, we're able to like tap on each other and help out kind of year round on various things and also be in coordination when we're fighting for things. So we're not actually fighting over things. I want it here and I want it there. We're fighting together for a much bigger pie to share across all of our needs. Um, and as Marquise mentioned, in the first year of 2021, the Solidarity budget was able to win $16 million of Green New Deal investments. Um, Green New Deal investments look like a lot of different things. Sometimes they look like community alternatives to policing, and sometimes they look like affordable housing. But by working together and having a shared agenda and a clear sense of our shared values, we were able to really leverage with the city, both internally with this big coalition, but also by mobilizing all of our folks for that public pressure. One thing folks on this call are probably really familiar with is that you can get thousands of public comments on things, but if you're not able to play the inside political game in the city to make it happen, it takes all those pieces working together. Um, so Solidarity Budget is still rocking and rolling, but I really want to share just briefly about what our Green New Deal work is right now. We're working on a special campaign from right now through November. And you can kind of think of this as like an off-season effort. If the regular season effort is all about that city budget, we're doing a lot of learning and discovered that we've got a parks budget too in the city, and it's actually just our council members who are on that board who have to kind of switch over hats and make decisions about park spending. So we got really curious about that this year, and we started a campaign I'm really excited about called Healthy Through Heat and Smoke. And this is again a coalition effort, a couple of folks from Solidarity Budget, but also lots of other folks that are more closely connected with houseless communities in Seattle, including Stop the Sweeps, uh, Whose Streets Are Streets, Real Change, and Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People based out of Seattle. We're all working together to get the parks to spend their levy money on turning community centers into climate resilient centers that have solar grids, AC, providing shelter from wildfire smoke and heat waves. And I'm so excited about this one because this is built on a lot of really nerdy learning about how the budget works and how the park budget works and understanding how we can come together and really team up to make spending happen in our communities in the next year for concrete needs that we really need. So I'm going to stop it there for a moment, Marquise, and ask you if you have anything else you want me to add. I know I'm kind of like very excited. Maybe I'll just recap our big learnings in here. Um, our big learnings have been get organized, not trying to do things alone. It takes a lot of organizations and a lot of different perspectives. I think you all are on that. Remembering that it takes an outside game to make big things happen, and go for the money. This money belongs to our communities. This money is from our communities and ought to be for our communities. There's a huge importance to remember to fight for union jobs and to be in coordination with union labor. And for an example for our Climate Resilience Center campaign, this is an example of a small win. It would really just be not that much money, but a meaningful project. But it's a chance for us to work together and build relationships with a lot of partners and to show a model project for how the city can spend money that can be replicated in a lot of other kinds of buildings. So we're excited to kind of bite off something bite-sized that can be accomplished.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grace. Yeah, if folks have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll get them answered. But I think this is such a great example of, we can do really big things we can do really big things as a coalition in a coalitional way. We can, we can pursue the twin goals of make sure our community knows about, how do they engage in the budget and how are their dollars spent with really important priorities that we know that usually get cut right when it comes to the budget cycle time of justice initiatives that maybe are harder to get to the finish line if we're not acting in coalition, if we're not speaking from a kind of big tent mentality. So thanks so much, Grace. Really appreciate it. Grace will be around if folks have questions in the chat, and we're going to jump right on. So I'm going to take back over for just a minute, y'all, and I'm going to introduce Mac. Mac is with the Office of Management and Budget, and Mac's going to be here to talk to y'all about, the budget cycle and all the information that goes into making sure that we have community members engaged. 2020 was quite a fun, challenging, interesting year. There's a lot of hardship in that, but there was some really cool things that started. And one of those initiatives was the city's new style of taking on the budget and making sure that that information gets shared out. And so, we've had 2.5 years of lessons now. And so I'm really excited to hear from Mac about what's going on for this budget cycle and how, we can make sure that we're connecting folks with the policy and the funding that shapes our lives in a really meaningful way. So without further ado, I'm going to have Mac take over.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone. I'm excited to be in this space. And so I guess I'll just jump right in. Next slide, please. And the next one. So just a little bit of a dorky agenda. These are just the 3 main points that I'm going to talk about, which is what the budget development process looks like, what the city's priorities are right now, and how the community is a part of this process and can be. So next slide, please. Awesome. And so as we launch in the budgeting process, these are the goals that we typically talk about and some that we reach better than others. And I just want to pause here and acknowledge that the city has a lot to do in terms of, building that belief and trust and understanding its role. And I think that the budget development process is a huge part of that, kind of to lift up what Grace said about, budgets being moral documents and they're a reflection of shared values. So knowing that my positionality as a city staff member and what the city's history is, I just wanted to emphasize that. So, I could also read to you what I have in my notes about this slide and what we typically tell people, but I just want to emphasize a couple of things. That third goal, establishing linkages to organizational goals, I think something that we're really trying to, not just, think like put on the list and think about, but just like really wrap into our development processes is supporting efforts to establish a direction and vision through different initiatives like Tacoma 2025, and especially I think the transportation master plan and the climate action plan and things that people have been working on for a long time, but kind of, creating that link and folding that into our own goals. And also focusing on results and outcomes given available public resources. What all those words mean is that the goal is, as much as possible, the budget office and the development process works to ensure that the programs and budget decisions produce like positive impact, right? Positive results, and ensuring, again, to lift up what Grace said, because they had wonderful ideas and thoughts, is that ensuring that we're good stewards of public resources, because are the resources that the budget office works with are the public's, it's the communities. So just wanted to put that out there. So next slide, please. And so here's a fun visual. So this is the city budget, and the totals for the city budget is shown here on a biennial basis. So the total budget over 2 years is about 3.66. Yeah. Again. So sorry, I have to clear my throat. So it's mainly a visual to break down funds and just something to note. So in that left side, you'll see that TPU/utilities and enterprise revenues, just emphasizing that that value under it has to be spent on utilities and enterprise. And so like these different funds that are laid out here have very specific roles. So retirement and trust funds go to pensions and other specific expenses, and special revenues that kind of in the orange right there, they go to specific projects like the Streets Initiative, our mental health programs, etc. And so what I'll focus on in the next slide, you'll see on the very right end of this visual, the general fund is the most flexible or fungible fund, and it's where you'll see the majority of city services and initiatives funded. So next slide, please. And so the general fund, this is an interesting wheel. So again, this is where most of city programs and initiatives are funded. You'll see that the total is about 508 million. And something to note about this visual is that some programs look like that they don't get a lot of funding through the city. For instance, you'll see that the neighborhood and community services part of the wheel looks a lot smaller than, say, your police or your fire departments. And I will say that something like the neighborhood and community services department gets funded by a lot of other sources of revenue, like grants and taxes and such. And the fire department, their EMS division gets funded by enterprise funds, and different taxes fund a lot of other departments as well. So just something to note, and that's a visual that I'm happy to share, or anyone else is free to use. So next slide, please. And so the city council priorities, as I may or may not have mentioned actually, are here. And so this is kind of the framework for how the city wants to fund things. And so you'll see that priorities are health, access, community safety, livable wage jobs, affordable housing and homelessness, and belief and trust. And I want to note that underneath the umbrella of health is where there's a lot of, underneath the umbrella of health is where environmental concerns are talked about and worked under, and stuff like that. So next slide, please. So I wanted to point out our budget engagement timeline. I think that the city has a long way to go in terms of not just including people, but just really folding people into the budget development process. And so our budget engagement timeline, in terms of where we are now, we're in that middle part where it says May through August. Sorry, the font is a little small. Where it says balancing act, online surveys, community forum, and other public input. And so if we start on the left end, we wrap the community survey, which is a phone survey that helps us assess the city's performance in major service areas. And though it has its limitations, it is one tool that the city uses to understand community members' perceptions. And then the results of that survey are typically given to city council prior to their workshop and priority setting session, which is where those priorities you saw earlier are set in that March-April timeframe. And then in early May, we give our 6-year forecast, which is when we in the budget office provide a financial outlook for the next 6 years. And at that point, we can see if we project a budget deficit or not. This helps us ask the right questions, hopefully in the next phase of that budget development. And at the same time, we ask staff to evaluate their programs. Does it serve, or does it have a real impact? What could we do better? So we ask them how to evaluate their programs and to what degree do they work. And after staff finishes, we're able to see what programs have a high impact. And that gives us and directors insight on what programs might be under-resourced or need other adjustments as we head into budget proposals, which is where we are now, actually. But it's also, at the same time, it's in this stage, in the May-August timeframe, that we use tools like Balancing Act, which I'll cover in a little bit. But by September, after that May through August timeframe of community engagement, where we go to farmers markets and special events, and wherever the community asks to talk about the budget, we're happy and plan to go to. So by September, we'll have heard all that feedback on what people want to see in the budget, and departments will have made proposals, and the city manager and the city council know what we've heard from the community. And then based on that and the financial outlook, the city manager presents the budget to council. And then in October, We have workshops with council on the proposed budget, do more, just talk to the community and say, hey, this is what was, developed. This is the proposed budget. What do you think of it? Yeah. And so after that, in November, hopefully after the council has their say, they approve a budget that covers the next few years. And so I want to talk about another tool, a couple of things on the next slide, please. So online, many of you may have seen this tool. It's a program called Balancing Act to gather input, and it allows people to balance a budget by making increases and decreases to service areas to balance the general fund budget, which you saw earlier. So we've kind of uploaded that information and seeing where people's priorities are, where people want the city to devote fewer or more resources. And so we're trying to see how this tool can be accessed by more people, whether it's transcreation and translations, maybe even a simpler tool, what have you. And so next slide, please. And so, as I said, we're also doing other things, and we acknowledge that, things like farmers markets, which we attend, and libraries or community centers or events may not reach everyone. But this is what we are doing right now, and it's something that we're working on and scheduling more events and kind of reaching people where they are, which is the whole goal. And we're also proposing to just kind of talk about the budget in terms of uplifting specific events in the communities where we can. And if people want to talk about the budget, we totally can. And another thing I want to lift up is that the city has started a participatory budgeting project. I don't have a slide for this, but I love talking about it. So I could, as long as we have time, I don't want to take up too much of it. We've started a participatory budgeting process in, I know it's clumsy to say, but District for formal purposes, District 4, so the east side Tacoma. And so that project is $1 million. So essentially, participatory budgeting is about gathering people who don't necessarily interact with who don't have access to a lot, or who don't typically engage civically and say, like, how do you want to spend X amount of dollars? In this case, we have $1 million from American Rescue Plan funds, which is amazing. And so it's a process in which people talk about how they want to build out that process, and then reach out to people, collect ideas, create proposals of those ideas, and then ask their community to vote. And after they vote, the city implements that, which is an amazing thing. And we hope to in the future, we plan to in the future implement participatory budgeting for all 5 councilmanic districts, and hopefully participatory budgeting is a thing that we can continue to do, because it's really the process and the idea, and it's very important. So next slide, please. And so speaking of American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, I want to thank Marquise for encouraging me to talk about this, because I agree with something he said, which is this is really exciting. But the city has been slated to receive, we did receive it, receive just under $61 million in direct aid from the federal government. So we got half of that in 2021, and we received the other half in 2022. And so the budget office worked with city council to kind of set objectives to use these funds on priority areas, but also using direct assistance to fill gaps in different programs, and focusing on big transformational projects, which I think in this context of what we're talking about, right, that's exciting. So I think we've implemented things with ARPA funds like citywide cleanup or Tidy Up Tacoma, an encampment response, farmers market funding, youth homelessness services. So it's exciting to know that because we're in a budget development process right now, with that other half of ARPA funding, we'll be able to fold it in as well. So that's another exciting opportunity. And so I won't go through this because it's a lot to think about. I won't go through it thoroughly, but this is kind of a visual of what happens from January through December in a budget development year. And you'll have kind of the capital side, the community side, the city council side, the citywide side, and then the departmental level. So that is what I have for all of you today. And I want to turn it back to our lovely host and see if there's anything I didn't cover or anything I can speak to while we're in this space.
Yeah, so I think you covered everything really well. And so I think if folks didn't get the full picture on that, there is a regular budget development cycle that's going on right now, where folks can attend a budget workshop, and we have more information on that. That'll be in mid-July, and then we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. And also, folks like Mac and Kenny Coble and the city are rolling out a new budgeting cycle process where they're going to allocate $5 million to the five council districts. And so I think District 4 is up and running. They're going to start District, I want to say maybe 3 or 2 next. And so if folks are in District 1, 2, 3, am I missing one? 5. I don't know if the recruitment's done, but if folks want to help shape how $1 million for your council district gets distributed in the face of the climate crisis and COVID and all these things that are happening to folks on the ground, you should reach out to Mac if you'd like to be a part of that process. Because I'm pretty sure they're recruiting for 3 of the 5, if not 4 of the 5. So I know there's probably some folks on the call that fall into those districts. So maybe Mac can drop their email, and then we can get connected to that process. So I'm going to keep chugging along for our getting back to our Tacoma Green New Deal and some of the CAP crossover climate action plan is that acronym that we're looking to. So like Mac mentioned, this is there's millions of dollars up for grabs, right? If we really come together to make sure that we're looking for climate forward initiatives. And so I think we're really blessed with the fact that the Tacoma Green New Deal that was drafted by Sunrise Movement with partnership with a couple council members aligns so closely with some of the work that the city's already been doing and already done. So a great example is the climate action plan that just finished for 2021. It finished, I think it got passed, I want to say in November. And so that's a really good blueprint as to how we can get the city into shape to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and do all those transformational things. And so our friends at the Sustainable Tacoma Commission and the Office of Environmental Policy and Sustainability have put together what is their version of the best way to get towards some of those CAP actions. And we know that those actually advance Tacoma Green New Deal and a lot of the big tenants. So we're really quickly going to talk about how that's kind of the point of why we're here, is to make sure that those $2 million in new climate initiatives make it into our 2023-2024 budget, because they unlock millions of other dollars in state and federal grants to make sure that we are stepping up to that climate mantle and getting really good provisions passed in the next year or so. So there's 3 buckets that we've kind of organized into to make it clear for y'all and how you can advocate for these dollars to make it to the finish line so we can make sure we're doing our part on climate. So there's going to be approximately $850,000 of new initiatives that will be matched with other dollars to make sure we're investing in environmental justice for all. $870,000 for one of the tenants suggestions is not fossil fuels, and then $250,000 for good green jobs. And again, this is not all the money that the city is spending on climate initiatives. These are just how we can start some of the processes to get bigger, better, badder dollars in the years to come, and to make sure that we're doing some things like planning for the future. And so you'll see in this next slide that there's some good things that these dollars are going to. One of the ones that I'm most excited for is pursuing getting the city the ability to hire an interdepartmental manager who is going to look for climate resiliency and making sure that the city and the county and health department and all these places are on the same page about wildfire smoke and things like that. Because I'm sure everybody remembers last year, I think we got the notification, I heard about it, and I'm an environmental, right? Climate's my thing. I heard about the inclement heat wave, I think 4 or 5 days before, I think it was last June, right? Last June, that it was 112 degrees, depending on what part of Puget Sound you were in. And so making sure that we're anticipating things like that, because we know, we know that not only is that a huge loss of life, from ecosystems and organisms, right? We lost 1 billion creatures across the Pacific Northwest, if you include BC, Canada. We also lost hundreds of people from the Pacific Northwest because that was an unprecedented heat wave. And so making sure we're planning for stuff like that in the face of climate crisis is essential. And so there'd be $500,000 for that. And some other of these buckets too, you can see on the screen, like making sure that we get fossil natural gas out of buildings, $300,000 for that to unlock other dollars so we can retrofit homes, and making sure that we're getting gas out of homes because it's an impact to human health and the climate health. So these are some of the ways that those dollars are being broken out. We thought it'd be helpful, and you'll see in the advocacy letter that we share with y'all to the breakdown of these dollars as well. And so, we haven't, if we do this right, we have a chance to usher in millions of dollars worth of federal grants and even state grants, right? We have some awesome things that have passed in the last couple of years, not perfect, but good new revenue sources like the Clean Fuel Standard, the Climate Commitment Act that puts a price on carbon, the new the new state transportation package that was, I think, 17 billion over 16 years. There's gonna be a lot of dollars out there to make sure that we are transitioning towards net zero and taking care of the people along the way. But the city has to have staff members to go after those things. They have to have match dollars to make sure that the city can fund its portion of these programs. And so, when we unlock the climate action plan and the Tacoma Green New Deal, we're going to be able to lock millions more of dollars. And there's, if folks are familiar with the bipartisan infrastructure package, that was about 2/3 of $1 trillion worth of new funding plus re-upping old funding that was about to expire. And so, one of the buckets they have nationwide is $1 billion to make sure that they're revolutionizing transportation systems for everybody. $2.5 billion for making sure that our port infrastructure is modern and hopefully low carbon. And so, when the city can bring forward its little bucket of money, it unlocks so much more. And these dollars, we can't have Tacoma be passed over. Tacoma is not seen as like the sexy place to invest, I'm sure, on the federal scene, but we know that if a city like Tacoma that has a huge legacy of polluting industries, that has, several large corporate polluters in the tide flats as we speak, if a city like that can reach net zero carbon emissions and beat that 2050 clock, then we know anybody can do it. And so we really are the experimental zone for making sure that we can live up to our climate mantle. And so these dollars will do that. So here's our timeline to win, to kind of contextualize it for y'all. And so we're actually rocking away. So we will get out of this presentation a little early, which is exciting. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but I hope this kind of gives folks maybe a more linear idea of how we're moving forward on the Tacoma Green New Deal. So right now we are in the kind of Home in Tacoma phase 2 in budget cycle process, and that should be all wrapped up by the winter of 2022 or maybe late fall. We're also in another process for the Tide Flats sub-area plan. And so that is, it's going to be, it's on a similar track to the other two, but it's going to probably wrap up a little bit later. And so the sub-area plan is going to be finishing probably in 2023. And then, even if we have a really great sub-area plan and we have a really strong, strong transit-oriented green Home in Tacoma phase 2, there's still going to be some leftover stuff to do on the Tacoma Green New Deal and climate action front. And so that's when we're going to be turning back to City Council to pass the Tacoma Green New Deal resolution. And so far, we have about half of council on board for our Tacoma Green New Deal. So we have some work to do, but we know that it's very achievable in the near term. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean from Tacoma DSA to talk a little bit more about how we're going to get y'all directly engaged. And yeah, Sean, you want to take it away?
Sure. Okay. So the first thing in terms of the budget that folks can do is send a budget letter to the City Council, and Marquise will have a link to that to share around. On the 14th of July, folks can attend a budget workshop, and folks can also talk to their City Council member. It's really easy to do. Just reach out, schedule a meeting, and it has a pretty big impact when City Council members hear from people. So Tacoma DSA has mostly been focusing on the Home in Tacoma process. We've driven hundreds of letters, collected over 1,000 signatures, and we had a really strong virtual turnout at the Home in Tacoma scoping hearing. And we were able to push the City and Planning Commission to study some of our platform policies, particularly around sustainable building standards and mandatory affordability. Not everything we wanted could make it in. We wanted to put in like a second tenants bill of rights to build off the successes of our previous tenants bill of rights campaign. And we also wanted to push towards a social housing developer, but neither of those seem to have made it into the scope. So these items are the scope is gonna be studied, and we're gonna continue to push the city and planning commission to adopt these policies that will address the climate crisis and give power back to working class people. Our eventual goal will be to get a majority vote of the really most progressive home in Tacoma package from the Tacoma City Council to fully deliver on our demands. We're working to build our campaign through a 4-pronged strategy. So we have created 4 subcommittees through the Home in Tacoma for All campaign. The first one is our base building committee, which I help lead. That has to do a lot with street outreach, just talking to folks outside of events, petitioning, and working on our volunteer strategy, developing activists for the campaign. So we'll be meeting on Thursday, July 7th at 7 p.m. It's open to everybody. If you want to come and talk about how to help out there. The other parts of the strategy, we believe tenant organizing is a really powerful way to build our base. And that committee is going to be meeting on Tuesday, July 5th at 7 p.m. And there's a Zoom link for folks interested. We're going to be fundraising to build our campaign and hosting events. That meeting will be on July 11th at 7:30 p.m. And finally, our policy and lobbying committee, which will focus a lot on Home in Tacoma, will be meeting on June 30th, so tomorrow at 8 p.m. There's a link for that. You share in the chat. Finally, in terms of the sub area plan, on July 13th, folks can tune into the sub area scoping public meeting and also send in scoping public comments. So yeah, as Green New Deal advocates, we believe in building a strong intersectional movement. So I wanted to plug something that's going to be occurring right after this event here. Folks from the Snake River campaign, which is a campaign to reach the 4 dams on the lower Snake River, are requesting that folks attend the Tacoma Public Utilities Board meeting and demand that our public utility stops getting electricity from those dams and pushes for a just transition. But yeah, unrelated, but if you want to sharpen your advocacy skills and stand up for rights of indigenous people, rights of nature, it's a good thing to attend. And I think that is all for me. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. So we want to leave y'all with this parting kind of sense of inspiration and hope. We'll stick around for Q&A and some stuff you'll probably be getting some more stuff in the chat. But I think the Tacoma Green New Deal comes from our federal Green New Deal, right, which is a federal framework to transform the United States to be low carbon and just, investing in things like housing, job programs, transit-oriented development, all these things that we don't think of conventionally as climate, because we know that we live in this massive system that it disproportionately impacts Black folks and brown folks the hardest, and it creates less economic opportunity for all. And so when we tackle those two kind of twin crises while we're taking care of climate change, we can do transformative things at a scale never been seen before. And so I wanted to quote one of the co-authors of the Green New Deal, the Federal Green New Deal, U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This quote I really love, and I think it's part of our helpful Green New Deal visioning, is we can be whatever we have the courage to see. We're always forced to be in this scarcity mindset where we're forced to kind of fight for scraps. And I think there is nothing wrong with, as community members, going after those scraps, right? But we also have a chance, as we've seen this global reordering of systems, to go after the biggest, baddest, most bold things that will transform people's lives, maybe not permanently, but for generations. And so, as we look for inspiration in the New Deal era that came out of the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, we believe it's our chance to start the Green New Deal era. And so, hope everyone leaving this has the courage to go see all these things to fruition. We're going to send a very comprehensive, we'll try to make it as condensed as possible, email after this that has that letter campaign link and all those resources for this recording and stuff. And that'll probably come right after the holiday weekend. So everyone, you can take a long rest weekend, and we'll give you all those resources because all this advocacy is not going anywhere. And so anything that is like in the next couple of days, we'll make sure to drop in the chat so folks can have. And I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we're just going to stick around for another 15 minutes or so to do a little bit of Q&A. If folks have any questions about the campaign or any of the crossover, or folks want to ask our city staff members who are here about any of the work they're doing, we're going to stick around for a little bit. So we'll stay on record so that it makes it to the YouTube and Facebook. But I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we can, if folks have questions in the chat, feel free to drop them and we can make sure they get answered. And so for anybody who was speaking on panel, let's have you jump back on video just for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And so does anybody have questions while we're here? Come on, I know some folks have questions, so if you got them, send them while we're here. And then if you're on the phone, we can find a way to get you to be able to talk. Let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna actually give everybody the ability to talk. Might be a bad idea, we'll see. So folks have questions. Speak now or forever hold your pizza. Maybe we'll wait a little bit, but I'm just gonna give folks the ability to ask questions if they need to. Alrighty, so I see questions in the proper Q&A. Wow, we got a Zoom wizard. Will there be a follow-up email with all the upcoming events and opportunities? Yes, we're gonna be sending that out. Just we're working on a fact sheet from the coalition perspective that is all this information in a nice, sexy package. And so some of that stuff is not gonna be finished until probably the end of the week or early next week. So we're gonna send out like a comprehensive follow-up email on Monday or Tuesday. But if folks need something like right now, you let me know and we'll make sure that you get it in the interim. And we'll drop some links to in the Facebook event. Some of the stuff that's like really pressing, like DSA's event that's tomorrow, that's not going to go in the full email. I mean, it will go in the full email. Well, actually, it'll be too late. Things are going to come in the Facebook group too. So you'll get a nice comprehensive email in a couple of days, and then we'll give some stuff in the Facebook event that's like, we want to make sure you don't miss it over the holiday weekend. So thank you for asking that question, Kenzie. Alrighty, I'm going to go back to the regular chat to see if, okay, so we have a question. Grace, can you say more about the 30 million? And so I think it was 16 million for Seattle.
Yeah.
30 million was Boston, which we can also jump into, but I'll let Grace take that away first.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Marquise. I think Ellie might be talking about something I mentioned in the chat, which is that one of the things that the Solidarity Budget crew in Seattle was able to win was funding to be able to do participatory budgeting in Seattle. And so we actually, I wasn't actually part of that crew, but I'll take a little credit. So we won $30 million in that process from 2020 to 2021 towards a participatory budgeting process. And the plan was for it to be implemented in line with the Black Brilliance Research Project's 2021 report. So a partnership there. And the funds are carried over from 2021 with a $2 million increase, and they're designed to kind of keep going and to put some budget control into the community's hands. So that's one thing that the Solidarity Budget in Seattle was able to win. But I think one thing to name there for ideas for Tacoma, the Solidarity Budget Coalition made a really proactive move, which was, let's design the budget that we want and present that to the city while the city is in development process, rather than waiting for public comment to say, Okay, here's where it is. So it took some time to create a big, bold, beautiful imagination of a budget and present it as a proposal for the city to work with. So that I think is a really interesting option to say, what can we dream up for this money as a community? And one more thing to add was that through the solidarity budgets work, I think Seattle was maybe one of only 2 cities in the US that 2 years in a row divested from the police department, in large part and due to that huge coalition effort maintaining pressure over time. That's a
Awesome.
really, really long answer. Sorry.
No, it's great. No, I think the more information, the merrier. And we still have folks hanging around, which is awesome to see. So there is a question in the Q&A, and then I'm going to try to jump to see who has their hand raised. It's not quite showing me, but I will see in a second. Are we encouraging folks to apply for relevant city advisory committees or events to engage in political campaigns? So on the second part, we have to be a little bit, I mean, mostly everyone on this call, except for maybe DSA, is 501c3s or government organizations. So we can't quite engage in political campaigns in the conventional sense, but we do really encourage people to get into their local organizing capacity in whatever sense possible. And so, like this person mentioned, advisory committees are great. Maybe we can try to find the advisory committee, the postings. I know that there's a webpage for that. And I know like a wave just happened, like the planning commission, some new folks just jumped on at the beginning of the year. And so I'm not 1000% positive on what's open right now. But like I mentioned, the city's going to be recruiting for those for 2 or 3, maybe 4 of those districts for the balance or participatory budgeting. So that's going to be $1 million that folks can allocate. And then the city is always recruiting for some of those advisory committees as well. And if those aren't recruiting, there's always some of the DSA committees, and 350 has some committees in as well. So we have, and CHB as a coalition. If you want to join the Green New Deal Coalition, that's another great way to jump in as well. So yes. And so somebody asked, can we repeat about the 6:30 event? So it's just a committee meeting, and so DSA is hosting their policy committee meeting. So that's where they get together and they help craft some of the policy advocacy that they're doing for, I think it's specifically around home in Tacoma, to my understanding. But there's probably other campaigns that maybe bleed into that. I don't know if Sean wants to speak to that.
Yeah, so it's policy and lobbying. So it also has to do with our strategy towards elected officials. We are expanding our scope a little bit beyond home in Tacoma because we want to get our full platform passed, but home in Tacoma will still be a big part of that.
Awesome. And okay, was there a raised hand that I missed? All righty, so I think we're finishing up here. Yes, if we would love to partner with organizations. So now that I'm not screen sharing, I have magical ability to go grab links for folks. So I'm going to grab our partnership application. Not that it's really all that formal. It's just a spot for us to kind of gather things all in one spot per se. But we do have a forum if folks are interested in partnering up with us at a formal level, whether that's signing on to the coalition, whether that's being on, if you want to help steer some of the policy, we have stuff for you. So I'm really quickly going to grab that and drop that in the chat. If folks do want to make sure that their organizations are signed up, we would love to have you do so. And alrighty, so I almost have that link ready in just 2 seconds here. Just gonna make sure that it's good to go. And we'll put this one into, so folks will get kind of our whole fact sheet. Our fact sheets have a lot of these resources. So don't feel like you have to organize these all in one spot, because I know sending them in the chat is overwhelming. I know receiving them in the chat is overwhelming. But if there is something like you really wanna, you're like, I need that, maybe just save it just so you have it. But I just dropped our form to sign up to be on the Tacoma Green New Deal Coalition or to partner in whatever way it makes sense for folks. And so I think that closes out our last question. So I just want to say thank you so much to our partners at the city, our partners on the STC, who I think are on the audience somewhere. Thank you so much to 350 Washington, 350 Seattle, which Grace works for, 350 Tacoma, which Grace helps out with as a Tacoma resident. Thank you so much to Tacoma Democratic Socialists of America and all of your fantastic organizing around home in Tacoma and all the other party campaigns. there's some conversation folks in here. Thank you so much as well. And I think we're gonna end it there. But again, we'll be putting some of those really pertinent links in the Facebook event. So make sure you have the Facebook events. If you go to Communities for a Healthy Bay, it's in there. And I can probably drop it really quick too, if I'm quick. And then we're gonna send like a full, nice, juicy email to everybody with all of the proper links after the holiday weekend, so folks can hit the ground running on all of the important work we got to do. So with that, I will end this. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully you can enjoy a little bit of sun.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Marquise.
Take care.
Thank you,
Bye.
Marquise. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.